Okay, this is our daily study of Pirkei Avot, the Mishnah Ethics of the Fathers, for those who have yard site for tonight, the 1st of Av. Melvin Beiser, Maurice Burnett, Arlene Levine, Minnie Levine, Miriam Lukowitz, Samuel Lukowitz, Max Pasnick, Paul Schneiderman, Anna Salman, Leah Strauss, Molly Tropp, and Fava Weiner. May their memory be for a blessing. A link to the text of the Mishnah will be in the first comment below. Chapter 5, Mishnah 9. So this Mishnah continues where the last one left off. The last Mishnah says there's 7 kinds of punishment that come to the world for 7 kinds of sin. And the previous Mishnah listed 5 of them, and this Mishnah lists the last 2. So why do these 2 sort of stand apart, at least in this cut of the Mishnah? There are different versions, actually, of how to number the Mishnah. But all right, according to this numbering that we have in the website Sefaria, which I'm posting, and in the Kahati, why does it put these 2 in a category of their own? And from what I gather, it's because these 2 actually have explicit verses in the Torah that connect the particular punishment to the particular sin. The previous Mishnah was sort of rabbinic tradition says this X happens because of Y. But here, these sins are particularly severe in the Torah themselves for an individual to do, and also the Torah specifies this punishment. So let's see. Chaya ra bala olam. Al shvuas shavi al chil Hashem. Wild beasts come upon the world because of false oaths and for the desecration of the divine name. So there, the Tochacha in Leviticus and the end of Vayikra, the rebuke says explicitly, I will send wild beasts against you for profaning my name. And profaning God's name is either swearing falsely, because in court you swear by the name of God, and that's a severe prohibition to desecrate God's name, or otherwise desecrating God's name by acting inappropriately while being religious. So, I remember when I was a kid going on field trips, and the boys all wore our yarmulkes, and the teacher always warned us, don't make a chilul Hashem. Don't desecrate God's name. You're wearing a yarmulke. You're representing yourself as a religious, godly person, and if you act bad, it just reflects poorly on the religion itself. And whenever there's a headline of a rabbi who embezzled millions of dollars or whatever, of religious Jew committing a crime, that not only is it the crime, but it's a chilul Hashem. It's also a desecration of God's name. Okay, so why do wild beasts come upon the world in response to that? The Meiri explains very beautifully, God punishes measure for measure, midah keneged midah, and it's because the person turned himself onto the level of beasts. Why is that? Because it's our speech that differentiates us from the animals. You have to sanctify your speech and, of course, your actions. So by swearing in God's name and your words don't mean anything, or by acting in a way that you don't care how it reflects, you're sort of acting like an animal, and then therefore wild beasts come. Okay, so galus bala olam al ovdei avodah zara ve'al gilui arayos ve'al shvichas damim ve'al hashmatas haaretz. Exile comes upon the world because of idolaters, for incest, for bloodshed, and because of neglect of the sabbatical release of the land. Okay, this too the Torah says explicitly. It says it comes upon the world, but it seems to mean specifically the Jewish world, that we Jews will be exiled from our land, the land of Israel. Right? It's directed to a Jewish audience. So the Torah says explicitly that if you commit certain sins, you lose your right to live on the land. So what are those? So one is idol worship. It's the Holy Land, and it's the Jewish homeland because it's the place where we connect with our one God. And if we break that covenant, God says, I expelled the pagan Canaanites before you. They were barbaric and they sacrificed their children to their gods. And if you act the same way, you'll be exiled and expelled from the land. Okay. Sexual immorality. That kind of breaks down society. The basis of society is family and marriage. And then if you, commit adultery, incest, sexual immorality, it negates the family and therefore negates the entirety of society itself, and therefore you don't deserve to have your society, and you'll be exiled from the land. Scary stuff. And finally, murder. That's kind of self-explanatory. But the basis of any society is the right to exist as a human being. Every person is created in the image of God, individual human rights, and if there's rampant murder, if people's lives aren't being protected, then society doesn't deserve to be fixed in the land. So those 3 sins, interestingly, are the Jewish cardinal sins for which a person has to lay down their life. Usually in Jewish law, you can break any commandment to save life. So, eating on Yom Kippur, God forbid, if people who are diabetic comes up every year, if you have to eat, you can break any commandment to save life, to save your health, but not these 3. If to worship idols, it's better to lay down your life rather than worship idols. To commit sexual immorality like adultery, better to die instead, very powerful, and to kill someone else. If someone says kill him or I'll kill you, a Jew is required to be killed rather than kill someone else, kill another innocent person, that is. We believe in killing for self-defense or in the context of a just war. But okay, so those are the three cardinal sins. Then there's a fourth one, neglecting the sabbatical year. So the Torah says to Jewish farmers, let your land lie fallow every 7 years. And that relates to the land itself. Well, if you're not respecting the land that God gave you, the land will spit you out. It's kind of this, borrow a term from another religion that I like, karma, and the prophets say the Jewish people weren't keeping the sabbatical land properly, the sabbatical year properly, and therefore that led to our exile. So it's measure for measure. Okay. And now be arba prakim hadever misrabe, baravius uvashvius uvamotzei shvius uvamotzei achag shabachol shana v'shana. Baravius mipnei masar ani shabashlishis, bashvius mipnei masar ani shabashishis, uvamotzei shvius mipnei peiros shvius, uvamotzei achag b'chol shana v'shana mipnei gezel matnos anim. Then it says, okay, pestilence increases at 4 periods. Once we're talking about why certain plagues come. So plague, which is sadly what we're dealing with now, right? Disease always increases. And I mentioned in yesterday's video, this could mean in times past when God's providence was more pronounced. Doesn't necessarily mean nowadays, but in biblical times, plague would increase at 4 times. In the 4th year, in the 7th year, in the year after the 7th year, and at the conclusion of the feast, which is Sukkot, each year. Sukkot is called the Great Feast. The end of the high holiday season, big blowout way to end the season. Okay, so this is talking about the sabbatical year cycle. Every 7 years you let the land lie fallow, but there's also within those 6 years there are different rituals that are supposed to be marked. So in the 4th year, pestilence increased because of the poor man's tithes of the 3rd year. What that means is in the 3rd and 6th year of the sabbatical cycle, you're supposed to give 10% of your produce to the poor. Now, you're always supposed to be giving tzedakah. You're always supposed to be giving charity, but there's a specific tax of 10% twice in 7 years, interestingly enough. There's 10% also every year to the Levite, who doesn't have land and lives off that tithe, but there's a tithe to the poor in the 3rd and 6th year. So pestilence increases in the 4th year because people aren't giving their tithe to the poor in the 3rd. Kind of sad, like people always neglect that. They don't give enough charity. Pestilence increases in the 7th year because people didn't give their tithe to the poor in the 6th. Remember, it's in the 3rd and 6th year you give this 10% to the poor. Okay, it also increases in the year after the 7th year because of the 7th year produce. In the 7th year itself, when you let your land lie fallow, part of that is you're required to make your land hefker, ownerless, and declare anyone can come into my farm. You're not working your land, but whatever grows naturally is for the poor to come eat. Come into your field and pick an apple and just eat it. But people would neglect that, and they'd still, say that this is mine, keep out, which you're not supposed to do. And because they neglect that, pestilence comes after that year. And then finally, every single year after Sukkot, because Sukkot is the time that you're also supposed to agriculturally give to the poor. Sukkot is the harvest season. And in the harvest season, there's all sorts of agricultural gifts you're supposed to give to the poor. That which you dropped on the ground while you're harvesting, you're supposed to leave it on the ground and not pick it up so the poor can come pick it up. Pay a corner of the field, you're supposed to leave a corner of the field for the poor. And people wouldn't do that. And so pestilence comes then. So very powerful lesson on the importance of tzedakah and the sad, history that people weren't properly giving their charity. Nothing new under the sun. Okay. With that, we don't say the Malay on the festive day of Rosh Chodesh, the first of the month. Instead, we say the prayer following the study of Mishnah. Ana Adonai malei rachamim asher biyadcha nefesh kol chai v'ruach kol basar ish yenu l'ratzon lefnecha torasenu tfilasenu ba'avor nishmos kol ha'askaros shel halayla ugmol na'im mehem b'chaska gadol l'toch lehem shari rachamim v'chesed v'shar gan eden uskabelos am ba'avo v'chibo shlach lehem malachecha akadoshim v'atorim lolichem alashivim tachas eitz chaim eitz al nishmos hatzadikim hatzikanios chasidim v'chasidos lehanos mizu shchimascha la'aspia mituvcha hatzafim hatzadikim v'aguf yanuach b'kever b'menucha nechona b'chedva v'simcha v'shalom keduksiv yavo shalom yanuch al mishkvasam Olech nechacho, uchsiv yalzu chasidim b'chavod yirano mishkavasam, uchsivim tishkavlo sivchad v'shachavta v'arbash nasecha. And in English, please, O Hashem, full of mercy, for in your hand is the soul of all the living and the spirit of every human being. May you find favor in our Torah study and prayer. For the souls of Melvin Beiser, Maurice Burnett, Arlene Levine, Minnie Levine, Miriam Lukowitz, Samuel Lukowitz, Max Pasnick, Paul Schneiderman, Anna Salman, Leah Strauss, Molly Trop, and Fava Weiner, in whose memory we study and pray. Accept them with love and affection, and send them your holy and pure angels to lead to settle into the tree of life. Here's the souls of the righteous and devout, to enjoy the radiance of your presence, to satiate them from your good that is concealed for the righteous. May their body repose in the grave with proper contentment, pleasure, gladness, and peace. As it is written, let him enter in peace, let them rest on their beds. Everyone who has lived in his proper way. As it is written, let the devout exult in glory, let them sing joyously upon their beds. As it is written, if you lay down, you will not fear. When you lay down, your sleep will be sweet. Amen.